I'd like to take a few moments just to introduce our moderator and panelists. Gail King will moderate today's panel discussion. Gail is the co-host of CBS This Morning and also is editor-at-large of the award-winning Oprah magazine. Dr. Condoleezza Rice, who has served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, in addition to being a published author and professor at Stanford University. Dr. Rice also serves as a senior advisor to our corporate board of directors and is also, most importantly, a Birmingham native. Joining Dr. Rice today is Judge U.W. Clement. President Jimmy Carter appointed Judge Clement as Alabama's first African-American federal judge in 1980, and he is also credited with addressing some of the most important issues of our time. Doug Jones, a former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, is also participating in the discussion today. While in office, Mr. Jones received international media attention as the lead federal prosecutor in the successful prosecution of the historic cold case involving the 1963 bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. And finally, we have U.S. Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas. She has worked towards improving human rights around the globe, and her initiative, A World of Women for a World Peace, has been nationally and internationally recognized. We also have a number of special guests with us today. I'd like to recognize U.S. Representative Terry Sewell of Alabama. She is here with several other congressional members, but also we'll hear in a moment from Governor Robert Bentley and U.S. Secretary of Transportation Anthony Foxx in a moment. I do also want to express and acknowledge the contribution that William Bell, our mayor, and the team at the Birmingham City has involved in helping us put this together. We do believe that this will be an enjoyable but also a transformational discussion today. Regions in the city of Birmingham have worked together very closely to make this happen. This gives us a real significant opportunity to once again support our community and our state as we commemorate a pivotal time in our nation's history. Let's give a round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. You know you're in good company when you come to the South and they serve banana pudding for dessert. There's not many places you go in the country, so Grayson Hall clearly knows how to entertain today. You know, when I arrived this morning, I just got here this morning, and the driver who met me at the airport said, "Hello, my name is Scott, and I will be taking care of you today." And I thought that was such a nice thing. It just says to me again what Southern hospitality means. He didn't say, "I'm your driver, good to see you." He just said, "I'll be taking care of you today. Is there anything you need?" I was so touched by that. So I'm delighted to be here. You know, my dad grew up in Birmingham, so I spent many of my summers in Birmingham, Alabama. My grandfather was a pastor. Am I writing on myself? I'm just going to speak for a minute. Okay. My grandfather was a pastor, so Birmingham is something that I know very, very, very well. Before we start the panel, there are some introductions I would like to make. Specifically, I want to start with your governor, Governor Robert Bentley, who I have to tell you, I'm really delighted I'm wearing his favorite color of blue. I didn't know that when I got up this morning, Governor, but I was very excited about that. He shares his banana pudding, another good characteristic. He is the 53rd governor of Alabama, and he said, it's not necessary to mention this, but I do think it's important for you to know that when he became governor in his first year, he created 10,000 jobs, that Alabama has the lowest unemployment rate in the Southeast. You go, Governor Bentley. But most importantly, he said, this is what I care that you say about me more than anything. He loves his job. He loves people. And while he's a Republican, as you know, he has many friends who are Democrats. And most important of all, he said he's had a front row to civil rights. Governor Bentley, will you please join us on the stage for a second?
Thank you, Gail, and good afternoon to everyone. You know, 50 years ago, our state stood poised on center stage as a series of historic events unfolded around us. By the time 1963 had ended, Birmingham and Alabama saw events that changed the course of history. I've been privileged to join in a number of celebrations and commemorations and memorials throughout this year, marking the 50th anniversary of a significant time in Alabama. It's an honor and a privilege to serve as your governor and to join in remembering the incredible and pivotal moments of 1963. On behalf of the state of Alabama, thank you for allowing me to join you as we celebrate the anniversary of the events that shaped the civil rights movement in the history of our nation. When I delivered the State of the State in early February, I felt like that it was important that we set the tone for this year. I wanted to pay tribute to the men and the women and even the children who played an integral part in the state's rich history. They were the peaceful protesters, the leaders, the little girls who changed our state for the better. I believe it's important that we remember 1963 and Alabama's role in history. This week, we are remembering our past, but we're also looking forward to a new chapter in our state's history. Today, as y'all discuss what happened in 1963 in Alabama and how it translates across America and around the world, you'll be asking, what lessons can we learn from 1963 in moving beyond civil rights? You know, toward the end of Dr. Martin Luther King's life, he also began to look not just at civil rights, but also a broader cause that he talked about, which were human rights. I encourage these discussions today, and I thank all of you for your willingness to participate. In 1963, the nation watched what was taking place in Alabama. As we look 50 years forward, let's invite the nation to once again look at our state and show them that we're a state that works together to create opportunities for everyone, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of politics. And again, thank you for having me with you today. I look forward to returning this Sunday as we have a worship service at 16th Street Baptist Church. God bless you all, and thank you very much.
I notice Mayor Kevin Johnson in the audience today. Kevin, please say hello to everyone. Good to see you from the great state of California. The other person who will be addressing you today is the only one who has been nominated for a cabinet position that will be addressing you today by President Barack Obama. And our president said about Anthony Fox at the time, he's got the respect of his peers, mayors and governors all across the country. As a consequence, I think he's going to be extraordinarily effective. So as a Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox's main job is to ensure that Americans maintain the safest, most efficient transportation system in the world. And I'm thinking maybe he can do something about airline fees. When I was talking to him backstage, he says what he wants more than anything is to connect people through transportation, because transportation, as we know, can sometimes be divisive. That's how I'm feeling today about Delta Airlines, but that's a whole nother story. No, I'm flying back on Delta, so really no hard feelings. Secretary Fox, please.
Thank you, Gail, for the wonderful introduction. And of course, I'm agnostic on Delta Airlines. It's great to be here today on behalf of the Obama administration. And in reality, just to be able to say that gives you an indication of how much progress has been made in the long struggle toward equality. Today, in particular, we are pausing to reflect on a very difficult moment in that struggle and in our country's history that took place almost 50 years ago in this city. On that day, 4 sets of parents sent their kids to church, a place they believed to be safe, And those 4 little girls did not come home. An act of senseless violence ended 4 lives that had just begun. 4 sets of parents never got to see their girls become women. And as the father of 2 kids, and I know many of you have children too or grandkids, what happened that day is unthinkable. The ironic thing about those events, though, was in many ways before they happened, we were different. But on that day, we became the same. Parents, families, people who see in the eyes of our children the hopes of an entire country. And when we saw the ashes at the 16th Street Baptist Church, people from all walks of life in this country paused. And they thought about what it would be like if such an event had happened to them. And as a result, instead of being flummoxed, people were called to action. They took to the streets, they protested, they changed this country. And so, as we celebrate a horrendous event that happened here in Birmingham, we also celebrate a tremendous series of individual acts that led to change this nation for the better. I'm the Secretary of Transportation, and I know that transportation doesn't necessarily, in your minds, correlate to empowerment, which is the topic of the entire weekend. But let me tell you that in many cases, our transportation infrastructure has codified the culture in which it has arisen. There have been neighborhoods that have been divided. There have been communities that have been cut off from the opportunities that are available not only in a national economy but in a global economy. And our opportunity now as a country is to use the infrastructure of this country to help connect people, whether they live in urban America or rural America, whether they live in red states or blue states. It's about connecting all of our people to the 21st century economy. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Columbus, Ohio, and I happened to visit a community called King Lincoln, named after Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln. And in that community, a highway, I-71, had divided the community and cut it off from the central business district. Well, in 2013, the United States Department of Transportation is a participant in capping that freeway, putting a cap on the top of it and connecting that community back to the central business district and connecting the people who live there to the 21st century economy. And so you see, out of decisions of yesterday, we always have a chance to improve our tomorrows. And that's what we should be doing as a nation. And so I'm pleased to be here as a representative of the President. Those of you who will be here Sunday will hear from our Attorney General, who's doing amazing work to address some of the disparities in the criminal justice system. But let's be reminded today that out of a senseless act of violence arose an urgency that caused this nation to change. And we still need urgency today. Thank you.
Mr. Hall has so graciously already introduced the panel, so I think it's best that we get started. You know, before I came here today, I had never been to the 16th Street Church, and I thought I can't come on this particular day and not go by the church. So I stopped at the church on the way there. They were having a service there, but what struck me was there was a white woman with her grandson who's 2 years old. And I went up to her, and she was pointing at the church, and she was pointing at the memorial. And I said to her, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Well, I'm from Birmingham, and I thought it was important that my grandson know what this is about, that this is more than just a story, that this is important." And I wanted him, even at 2, because he could barely talk, but even at 2, she was giving him very detailed instructions and very detailed conversation about what had happened. And I was very struck by that. You know, I lived in Turkey from first grade to sixth grade. So in 1963, I was in Turkey at the time, and we didn't have television. But what struck me is that the first time I saw my father cry, and I couldn't understand when he explained to me what had happened. You know, as a little kid, you don't really understand what that means, and certainly not living in this country. Condoleezza Rice, you know very well what that means. You were a friend of Denise McNair, who was one of the little girls who died that day. What do you remember that day, and what do you remember about her?
Well, it was a Sunday that at the beginning was like any other Sunday, and a few hours later would be like no other Sunday. My father was the minister, the senior minister at Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is a little less than 2 miles as the crow flies from 16th Street Baptist Church. My mom was the choir master, so we were at church a little early, and my mother was at the organ running through the music and preparing. And I was a little girl of 8, and I was sort of playing around in the church, and all of a sudden there was a jolt. And now, having lived in California for a while, I would say felt like an earthquake, but at that time I didn't know such things existed, but it just felt like a jolt. I was, though, a child of Birmingham, and in 1962 and 1963, Birmingham had become known as Bombingham, and so everybody knew that a bomb had gone off. Your first thought, of course, is it in our church? Within a few minutes, what seemed like hours, we would learn that there'd been a bomb at 16th Street Baptist Church, that 4 little girls had been killed or injured, people didn't really know, in the basement of that church preparing for Sunday school. And then the names of the little girls became known. And the Birmingham black community wasn't that big. Everybody knew one of those little girls. Denise McNair was the daughter of Chris McNair. He was the photographer for everybody's weddings and everybody's birthday parties. And Denise and I would play dolls. She was a bit older than I, and then she went to my father's church kindergarten, and I actually have a picture of my father handing Denise McNair her kindergarten graduation certificate. My uncle, Addie Mae Collins, was in his homeroom in school. And so everybody knew one of those little girls. And as an 8-year-old, what struck me was, first of all, fear. My father gathered everybody in the church and had everybody stay there. He told me later he didn't know whether to tell people to go home or to stay put, but they decided to stay put.
And as an 8-year-old, you're not used to death either.
You're not used to death.
You do not think about death at 8 years old.
You certainly don't think about death. You certainly don't think about terror of this kind. But as the day would unwind, what I remember most is asking my parents, why do they hate us so much? And my father saying, there are just hateful people, they're hateful men. And then asking to sleep in my parents' bed that night. Because from that moment on in Birmingham, there was no sanctuary. There was no place that was really safe. We didn't go out at night anymore. You stayed home, and if you went out, you made sure you were home before it became dark. But over the years, I would use that story more and more as an example of how, out of great tragedy, people could start to recognize their common humanity. And with your permission, I'll just tell one brief story from my time as Secretary of State. We had a conference called the Annapolis Conference to bring Palestinians and Israelis together for negotiations in the fall of 2007. And it had been a long day with everybody making speeches, and at the end I was supposed to do a wrap-up of this, and the State Department had done some notes for me to do this wrap-up. And I put my notes aside, and I said, I want you to know that I think I know what it is like for a Palestinian mother to have to tell her child, you can't go on that highway because you're Palestinian, because my mother had to say that to me, you can't go in that place because you're black. I said, but I also know what it is like for an Israeli mother to put her child to bed wondering if that child is going to wake up or be blown apart by a bomb. And I realized at that moment how much that had affected me. But for me, it was a story about the beginning of that terrible tragedy of reconciliation. And the human spirit is remarkable when it comes to the capacity for reconciliation.
And it says something, too, about pain is the same. When you're a parent who loses a child, pain is the same. You know, on that particular day, 26 kids had walked into the assembly room of the church that day, preparing for a sermon, and the name of the sermon that day was "The Love That Forgives." I think that's so ironic. Doug, I want to bring you into the conversation because you were a little boy at the time, and I'm wondering if the white experience was the same as the black experience when this happened for you.
Not for me. I mean, I think even to the casual observer, Gail, they probably recognize that my experience in 1963 was a lot different than the panel here. I mean, I lived in Fairfield. I grew up in a suburban community that was built after World War II in the 50s. We were the first family to move in there. It was Ozzie and Harriet type world. And what was going on in Birmingham, as for me as a 9-year-old, was as far away as you would see around the world. We didn't have an interstate at that point. We didn't have instant television and smartphones. So you saw the news, but look, as a 9-year-old white kid, I was concerned about things like football. Alabama football. If you've read the news, I'm still concerned about Alabama football.
Which, by the way, Doug, I hear there's a big game tomorrow.
I've been told that.
Texas A&M.
Yeah, I've been told that.
And Johnny football. I heard. But that was your concern growing up.
I mean, that was the world. But then September 15th to me was another Sunday, another day at church. I'm sure there was a lot of talking. And people having prosecuted those cases, they think there was some conversion, like Paul on the road to Damascus, as Bill Baxley would say, when that happened. But it was not in my conscience. It was not until probably 3 to 4 years later when I went to junior high. And for the first time, I went to school with black children.
Before then, you had never had any experience with black
My grammar school was all white. My church was all white. We had help that came in to help with the ironing and to do the clothes that we all loved, and she played with us, and she and my mother would dance in the den together. But that was the experience. Coming to Birmingham was an adventure. It was a day trip. You come down and you eat and you shop, and it was a full day. So for me, as I grew older and got into an integrated school and accepted some role as a student leader, we had to then make sure that our world, worked, that we had high school and junior high, and we had football teams that could play together and cheer for each other. And it was not easy to do, but it was a lot easier, I think, on the kids than it was on parents. And I'm really proud of the Fairfield school system, which by the way was one of the lawsuits that desegregated the Fairfield schools. Was tried and brought by Demetrius Newton, one of the great lawyers here who's passed this week. But those kids adapted, we worked, and we were a team. We were all a team. So it was not until years later that all of the history and everything, as I got involved with a little politics in college and some other things, that it came home.
That you realized what it was. Judge, you were born and raised in Birmingham and were gone only when you went to Columbia Law School, thank you very much, for 3 years. So what do you remember about that day and that time?
Well, my memory goes back further in 1963. And I've often said that everything that's happened to me in life since 1963 has been anticlimactic. For 5 months before the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church, I and other students at Miles College participated in the 63 demonstrations. And we gave ourselves credit for having caused that demonstration, because a year earlier, the students at Miles launched a boycott, selective buying campaign against the downtown merchants in Birmingham. It was so successful, got national attention. This, in the words of Newsweek, broken down Negro college on the western outskirts of Birmingham. I got the attention of Dr. King. He encouraged us in the efforts. And so within the next year, we saw the world turn upside down. When the demonstration started in April, many of us participated. I remember one occasion walking up to get a drink of white water from a fountain in Pizitz and being approached from a rear and a gun put to my back and marched out of the store.
But what made you do that? What made you go and say, I'm going to taste some of the white water?
Well,
And how old were you then? How old were you then?
I was 19 at the time. I was headed to law school, and I knew what a conviction would look like before the Alabama. But it was something that I had to do, encouraged in significant part.
Were you afraid? Were you
Well,
afraid?
I must have been afraid, but I didn't realize it. Dr. King's sermons were absolutely mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And they made you feel that you had to be a part of bringing about this inevitable change. And so we were a part of it. And we saw the city go from Bull Connor to a new form of government. We saw a new city council rescinding the segregation ordinances. We saw a President Kennedy announcing support for a new Civil Rights Act. We saw a March on Washington. And so by the beginning of the first semester of my junior year, when I met my wife on her first day of school as a freshman, we were feeling pretty good about the whole situation.
And you were feeling really good. You met your wife on the first day.
Exactly.
That's for me. Congresswoman, I'd like to bring you into the conversation about what you remember. Walter Cronkite Spike Lee's done a wonderful documentary, by the way, about the 4 little girls of Birmingham. It's really, really very powerful. And in that documentary, Walter Cronkite says that he doesn't think whites really understood the hatred of the Klan at that time. And as Dr. Rice has pointed out, and you said, we were known as Birmingham back then. In Birmingham, we knew the hatred of the Klan, but he said it took that moment, what happened to those 4 little girls at that church, to really bring it into the nation's consciousness, to say, we cannot accept this.
Well, clearly during that time, I was a young mother, and I'm now a grandmother. But during that time, all I could think about was being a mother who was married to a Baptist preacher's son, taking my baby to church and fearing that we might not come home alive. And
Where did you live at that time?
I lived in Dallas, Texas, the haven, the oasis of the Klan.
Yeah, but then, even though it was in Texas, you knew to be afraid.
Yes, we lived in a very divided city. I'm very pleased now that I've been a part of maybe not having it so divided now. But we did, and I remember that shortly after that, there was a 14-man committee. 7 white men and 7 black men were chosen to come together to begin some communication. During that time, Dr. King offered to come in to help, and the black community was very afraid that if he came in, it might be a blow-up. Dallas, as a southern city, is one of the few that never came to the growth of reacting to what was going on. Consequently, no riots. It was always a way to kind of placate. And so it was a while with people moving into Dallas, as I did, to join hands and decide we were going to be a part of it. Things were not okay, and it was not okay to be afraid to walk the street at night outside your neighborhood. It was not okay to see that your children didn't have the same books and didn't have the same supplies in school. It was really not okay to go into a department store and not be able to try on clothes if you were black, or try on shoes. And so Back during that time, I organized the 50 sensitive black women in Dallas. And we never got up to 50.
Only 50?
We didn't get up to 50,
only 50?
but we kept saying 50 because we thought that was impressive. And we organized a boycott of those downtown stores. And for 2 years, we took pictures. I had somebody to take pictures of everyone who crossed those lines to go into those stores. And the person who was responsible for me going into politics was one of the major owners of one of the downtown stores. His name was Stanley Marcus. And he opened Neiman Marcus.
Yes.
And he is the person who offered me the opportunity for a job so I could run for public office.
We thank Mr. Marcus for that. We thank that. I'm very fascinated with you, Dr. Rice. At 8 years old, you lose a classmate when most kids aren't even thinking about death. How that must have affected you and changed you and made you the person you are today.
Well,
because you seem fearless today, Dr. Rice.
Well,
you're a bad Mamma Jamma. You seem fearless today.
But well, I'll tell you something. First of all, those events really starting in 62 and 63, and here something Judge Clemens says very much resonates. I grew up in a very sheltered environment. People have to understand what it was like to grow up in black, middle class, professional class Titusville, where everybody taught school. I see Dr. Odessa Woffalk over there. She taught school with my father at Ullman High School. And we had our own ballet lessons, and we had our own piano lessons, and we learned to speak French because well-educated people learn to speak French. My grandfather was college educated. I'm not even the first PhD in my family. My aunt got a PhD in Victorian literature in 1952 from the University of Wisconsin. So we were educated, and that was our armor.
Oh, those Rices.
Well, the whole community was like that. And you valued
impressive.
family, faith, community, and education. That's what you valued. My mother went to Miles College, as did her sister and her brother. And so we were a sheltered community in a lot of ways. 62 and 63, it blew that apart because it didn't matter any longer if you were black and educated. Your community was still one in which a bomb could go off. And suddenly, I think the black community was brought together in ways that it had been really sort of stratified by education and color and lines and all kinds of artificial barriers between us. And so 62 and 63, you suddenly, even as an 8-year-old, 7 years or 8-year-old, you realize that there wasn't any sanctuary, it wasn't safe. I remember very well boycotting the downtown stores. I remember the Christmas, we used to always go down to Pizzett's or to Loveman's, and they had those wonderful displays with the characters in the window, and then we would go see Santa Claus, and then we would go Christmas shopping. And my parents explained that particular Christmas, we can't go down there this year because our people are standing up for our rights. And my mother actually got my Aunt G, who's in the audience here, to send the toys from Norfolk, Virginia, where she was living, so that we wouldn't have to buy toys in the stores. So suddenly this little cocoon in which I lived as a little girl in Birmingham was kind of exploded. So the events had an impact.
And I look at you, Doug Jones, as a little boy who loved Alabama and clearly still does, Alabama football. Let's fast forward to you're a second-year law student. And what happened to you in your second year when you were a second-year law student? I'm very fascinated by this story.
I was clerking downtown with a firm, and was enjoying law school. But I was told one time when I got a chance to spend a day with former Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas that if you really want to be a good trial lawyer, go watch trials. And there was a trial going on in 1977 that one of my heroes, Bill Baxley, a young Alabama attorney general, was prosecuting, the first of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases. Prosecuted successfully a fellow named Dynamite Bob Chambliss. And I cut classes for all Odessa and all you educators out there. I cut classes that week to go sit in on
She said she's not surprised.
Well, I cut those classes and sat in the balcony and watched one of the most dramatic history-making trials that the city had seen, that the state had seen, that really, at this point, I believe the country had seen. And nobody really believed that Birmingham had come far enough that an almost all-white jury could convict Chambliss, and they did. And I can remember the emotion of Bill Baxley when he put the pictures of those children in front of that jury. And that's the kind of event for a young lawyer that changes you. I mean, one, you know that you are in the right profession. You know you have chosen wisely. But then it also says that this profession can do good. There are things that you can do good. And so from there, I had already known the McNair family a fair amount. Got a job with Senator Howell Heflin right out of law school, who I also spread my wings a lot with him. I was actually on Senator's staff on the Senate Judiciary Committee, working on the nomination of the first African-American federal judge in Alabama, Judge U.W. Clement.
Oh, yes.
And I've got an itch.
Yes.
He looks a little different today than he did with his... And so for me, with that history and working as an assistant U.S. attorney and then in private practice, to have the ability, things just lined up just right for me.
The planets aligned for
Planets
you.
aligned just
Yeah.
right. I never thought I would get an opportunity to be the United States attorney, and things happened. One tragic, in which the current U.S. attorney passed away unexpectedly. But when that office opened up, it opened up an opportunity for me, and I will remember like it was yesterday, walking out as my nomination was winding through the Senate and the Department of Justice, and picking up the newspaper and seeing that this case had been reopened several months earlier, and knowing I was about to become the U.S. attorney.
That you could do something.
And it was going to be a case that was going to define me one way or another, and it was a challenge, but I was happy, and it was thrilling, to say the least, to be able to then hit the ground running to try to do that case, even though it took a few more years to do it.
It took a few more years, but let's think about that. You're a second-year law student in the room where he's giving his closing arguments. Right. Closing arguments on the day of, I think it was Denise's birthday, wasn't it?
Denise's birthday. Bill gave a dramatic closing argument on a day that would have been Denise McNair's 26th birthday, and he had the entire jury in tears, and the audience.
And then fast forward years later, in that same room, who is there?
I was there on the floor, not in the balcony anymore, 24 years later, and one of my first witnesses was Alpha Robertson, who was just a wonderful lady, who was the mother of Carol Robertson. And I thought of her when you talked about the jolt, because Miss Robertson testified. She was at home just a few blocks away, and her testimony was that it sounded like the whole world was shaking. And that's what happened. The whole world did shake. But she testified. I did the opening statement, and she testified as one of my first witnesses on a day that would have been Carol's 51st birthday. Wow. 51 years old. And now the case becomes a lot more significant than the history that we all know. It was about victims.
But you got the two
families.
convictions. You got
two convictions in two different trials.
Did they ever say they were sorry, any of them?
No.
Because when I'm struck, when I look at the tape, Chambliss is actually smiling and smirking, and there's no remorse whatsoever that I could see.
Blanton was very quiet, just went about. Cherry accused me and others of lying, and he was telling the truth. I am convinced. We called a lot of old Klansmen and their wives to the grand jury and tried to talk to them. We got virtually no help. I still believe to this day that old Ku Klux Klansmen are really not warm-blooded animals. They just don't have that in them to reconcile and to reach out and to do those things. So we got no help.
And Judge Clement, as you sit here today, they always say that the older people started the movement, but the young people continued the movement. And during lunch today, you said something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You said, "Don't assume that civil rights is here to stay."
Well, I'm serious.
I believed you when you said it.
The fact of the matter is that in the years following 63 and the enactment of the 64 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voter Rights Act and the 1968 Fair Housing Act, things opened up. We had a progressive Supreme Court that interpreted remedial laws in the way that remedial laws are supposed to be interpreted, namely liberally. And we saw all kinds of progress. But with the coming of William Rehnquist as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, we have seen a significant retreat in civil rights. And many of the gains that we made in the heyday of the movement, the 60s and 70s, many of those gains have now been cut back. For example, the Brown versus Board of Education decision of '54 was basically nullified by a 2007 decision of the United States Supreme Court, which says that school boards can't take race into account in trying to undo the one-race schools in the metropolitan areas
I see the
of the nation.
Congresswoman shaking her head. I don't want to get too much in the weeds of the details of specific cases. I just want to have an overarching conversation about the comment that he made about civil rights being here to stay, and that, we really shouldn't rest on the laurels of what has happened so far.
Oh, that's,
You agree?
to me, very, very true, very clear. If you didn't live any longer than just this year, you will see the effort to unravel many steps that we've made. And so as you see that, you have to say to young people, it's a process of vigilance and activity. There's nothing that you can take for granted. And that's not just in the United States, it's really all over the world. As I've traveled since I have been in Congress trying to talk about peace, we all seem to say we want the same things. There's not a person in this room that would not say they wanted equality. But when you start breaking down what equality means, it becomes a different story sometimes. I traveled from Waco, Texas, to go to South Bend, Indiana, just to go to a program that was nationally accredited in nursing, because there was nothing that I could attend in Waco, Texas. But my sister, who is 8 years younger than I am, graduated from Baylor in nursing in Texas. So things do change. Things have changed.
Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel encouraged as we sit here?
I feel
in
challenged.
marking the 50th anniversary? You feel what?
I feel challenged. There's a lot of reason to be encouraged, but there's so many reasons to be challenged. Just the ruling this year from the Supreme Court, that was intended to set us back. We're still trying to make sure that this law is carried out, and they want to dismantle it. It is no question in my mind that it will be a lifelong battle for me, my son, and my grandsons, because you can't take it for granted. It's like democracy. It is the most desired form of government, but it's also the most difficult form of government. And as I've traveled around the world and helped to write constitutions in other countries, I realize that our Constitution does not stay alive unless we make it. While last year I went to the Middle Eastern, Southeastern states, countries, to look at 20 years being out of the USSR. Some of them have made better progress than what we have, and we were celebrating the 336th anniversary, I think, of our Constitution. So it lets me know that the battle goes on, and it's all of us working together.
As we sit here, Dr. Rice, on this 50th anniversary in your home state, way back in the day, you see what and you think what. And I would like to bring the audience in. They handed me a sheet to let you know that there are cards in your seats, that we would welcome questions from you. We like intelligent questions for anybody on the panel, and Rick Swagler will go around and pick them up. And I see you there in the front row, Martin Luther King III. Welcome, 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 welcome. As you sit here in your home state, the 50th anniversary, do you feel challenged? Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel what?
I feel both. Mm-hmm. I feel both encouraged and challenged. Look, you don't stop building democracy at any point in time. Any population, any citizen group of citizens that stopped striving for the fine foundational principles on which we were founded to actually be true for more and more people. Any population that stops doing that will see movement backwards. And so it is absolutely the case that you have to keep striving and you have to keep pushing and you have to keep pushing forward. It's also important to keep defining what the impediments are to moving forward. And I think today the single biggest impediment to moving forward is the crisis in K-12 education. To my mind, it is the fact
We should
that
applaud that. You're right.
So we can have all the legal structure we want, but you want to try to get a job in this economy when you can't read? And there are an awful lot of kids, and by the way, an awful lot of them are poor minority kids who can't read because the school system is not serving them well. Now, I grew up in a family where my parents were educated, my grandfather was educated, and education was the key to everything in our family. And I grew up in a family of educational evangelists who worked hard to make sure that the next generation and the next generation was also well educated. But when I look at the fact that today I can look at your zip code and I can tell whether you're going to get a good education, I have to say that we are failing the least of our kids. And so we have to keep identifying what it is that is holding people back. There are a lot of things. There's social inequality, it's the absence of good jobs, of unskilled labor jobs, and so forth and so on. But the truth of the matter is, if you have means, you will move to a district where the schools are good. That's why houses are expensive in Hoover. If you
Is Hoover
Hoover, I'm sorry,
is a
is
Birmingham neighborhood?
outside of Birmingham. All right, it's a neighborhood
An affluent
outside
community?
an affluent community outside of Birmingham. That's why houses are expensive in Fairfax County, Virginia, outside of Washington D.C. That's why houses are expensive in Palo Alto, where I live near Stanford. Now, if you are really of means, you will send your kids to private schools. So who do you think's trapped in failing neighborhood schools? Poor kids, and a lot of them are minorities. And every single one of us have to own that problem and take responsibility for it and figure out what to do about it.
Doug, I want to go back to, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Birmingham church bombing, I'm curious from your perspective, challenged, encouraged, frustrated?
Yes.
Are you? As a white man, Doug Jones.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
it's all of that. There is some encouragement. I look around this room and I see so many of the business leaders in this city here that are doing such wonderful things for the city. And I know that 50 years ago, a lot of their predecessors, most of their predecessors, were part of the problem, just candidly. And they know that. I'm not saying anything that's not new. They were a lot of the problem here. And so I look around and I see the leaders and people stepping up, and I'm encouraged. But I'm also discouraged. I see, as Judge Clement noted, I see rollbacks in civil rights. I see where people of different colors, religions, gender, sexual orientation are reaching out for the same struggles, and they're constantly getting stopped. I can recall testimony in the Cherry case about a conversation that Bobby Frank Cherry had in Dallas, Texas in 1980, in which he and others are complaining about the rise of the Hispanic population. And Cherry says, and I'm not going to use the racial slur he used, but he essentially said we need to do to the Hispanics, the Mexicans, what we did with the black folks in Birmingham. And those are messages, I think, today, as Alabama tries to stop Hispanics from gaining jobs. We have an immigration bill that I think should be an embarrassment to the state, in all candor. I think we have people trying, in a state that was on the front lines of trying to expand the right to vote for so many people, now seems to be trying to figure out ways to take it away or stop it. So there is so much work that needs to be done and so many people that need to stand up. And there are so many good people in this room and around this state. And good people stood silent 50 years ago. And now good people need to stand up despite the political odds and just stand for what's right.
And how important do you think it is, guys, that people know their history? You know, I have both blacks and whites coming to me, you know, in their 30s and their 20s saying, did that really happen? Or is that just something that's in a movie? How do you move forward really when so many people don't even know the history?
Gail, I want to take issue with what Ms. Rice had to say about the importance of education. Black people have understood for at least as long as I've been on this earth the transcendent importance of education. And we've been trying to get it. But the fact of the matter is that racism has reared its ugly head far too often. And we see the effects of it, for example, in the Alabama legislature, where blacks have no power now. A few years ago, we were chairman of some of the most important committees. Now we might as well not be there.
Judge, how do you
There's
change
not
that?
a single
How
black
do you change it, Judge?
on the Alabama Supreme Court. 13 years ago, there were 2. You change it by first recognizing that it is a problem. And you can only deal with that problem when you make that fundamental recognition. And when we realize that the problem is there and we've got to deal with it, then we can try to bring blacks and whites together to work on putting aside the racial divides that are so pervasive in this society, excited by the election of the first black man as president of the United States.
Yeah.
Could I just say, you know, Judge Clinton, I don't think we actually disagree. I mean, my grandfather was college educated, so clearly blacks understood the importance of education. But, you know, it's awfully important that we don't have any excuse for not educating our kids.
Like there's no excuse for racism.
But even racism can't be an excuse for not educating our kids. Because the problem is that child who doesn't learn to read is done, right? It's done. He's done by 3rd grade, because if you don't learn to read by the time you're in 3rd grade, you will not read. And then you are done in this society. And so my only point is that not that racism doesn't exist. Heaven knows racism exists. Heaven knows it shows up, by the way, as we relitigate as Americans time and time again who gets to be a part of the we the people. Yes. Right? That's really what we do. Every generation, some group of immigrants wants to be part of we the people, and some people go like this. My view is it's an awfully good thing we have immigrants, because that's why the United States has been the powerhouse that it is. And to the day that we become anti-immigrant, we have cut off our heads, not our noses, we've cut off our heads. But that child in a bad school in Anacostia, outside of Washington, D.C., or in Oakland in California, or in some part of Birmingham, doesn't have time for the eradication of racism. That child has got to be educated today, racism or no.
But what about when they take away public funds which would go to public schools? The state.
I'm happy to give public funds to public schools as long as they're educating my kids.
But you're not a member of the legislature.
No.
And my point,
and Judge Clement won't be, because I'm not running for office.
That we cannot sweep over the problem of racism when we're trying to deal with education. It was, in substantial part, and I know it because I handled the case, when Jefferson County was ordered to desegregate in December of 1969, Vestavia Hills, Homewood, Midfield, and Pleasant Grove withdrew from the county school system and set up their own school systems because of racism. They did not want their kids going to school with blacks. And so education is indeed important. But we have to constantly bear in mind that we've got to deal equally so with the problem of those who simply don't want their kids to go to school with black kids, and they set up these suburban systems, which are, in terms of quality, vastly superior, and they are off limits.
You know what, Judge, you were really striking and hitting a nerve, because so many people are even afraid to talk about racism. I've had many people say to me, but Gail, we have a black president of the United States. What are you talking about, that there's racism in this country? I've had many people say that to me. And I think that unless we talk about it and really have a candid conversation about it, nothing really does change. And I always think it's important to initiate those kind of conversations. And we can have it in a way that I don't have to win in order for you to lose.
Exactly.
That it's a win-win for both of us.
Exactly.
My driver today, who said, I'm here to take care of you. I really like this guy, Scott, who said, no, I'm not kidding. I was very touched by that. He said, we must learn and we must remember history, but we have to move on, but we have to make sure it does not happen again. And don't you think that that's an important message too, Congresswoman?
I do think that's an important message. I think too, though, in spite of racism, we must educate our children. I don't know when we can eradicate racism. I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime in my lifetime. But we need to focus a great deal more on educating our children, because once you're educated, you can help to continue to eradicate, but you cannot do that if you're not equipped with the intellect to do it. In the past, anybody could join the marches and march down the street, but it was the person leading that march who articulated what needed to be said. We need everybody in that march now to be able to articulate what we are talking about. Just like we're talking now, we need to have it understood that with the right resources, every kid can be educated. We, as the people here, must make sure they have those resources.
You know, of the 4 little girls, 3 of their parents were teachers.
Yes.
I mean, so even back then, education was something that was extremely important.
Right. I wanted to say a word about history, though, if I may, because Congresswoman Johnson and I share that we have quite a bit in the international community talked about the experiences of America and democracy and so forth. And very often my European, particular colleagues would say, the problem with Americans is they don't know their history. And I would say, yes, and some of that's good, because actually you want to know your history but not be prisoner of it.
Yes.
You want to know your history but not see it as a constraint on what you can do in the future. But I would settle for knowing the history a little bit better. When I was provost at Stanford, I had a young student who had come from Bosnia-Herzegovina, and he had enrolled in Stanford, and he was taking a course in American politics, and he came to me and he said, I don't understand this stuff, the Southern strategy and segregation. And I said, Orhan, there's no reason you should know that history. Just go to Professor Brady, tell him to help you a little bit to understand the history of that. So I talked to Professor Brady a few weeks later. I said, thanks for helping Orhan with an understanding of what happened. He said, oh, it wasn't just Orhan I helped. He said about half the class had never heard of the Southern strategy, and about half the class didn't actually know that the South was once segregated. And he said, and 5 of them were black.
It's in Stanford.
And so this is Stanford. So I think it's important that we at least know our history, and we're frankly not teaching it these days.
No. And where does that start? I look at parents today. I think I'm guilty of this, that I never really took the time to sit down and say to my children, this is what happened, this is what it was like. This is something you should know, and it certainly isn't taught in schools. I think parents also have to take responsibility in what they pass on to their children. So aside from education, Doug, what do you think the lessons we can take from 1963 moving forward in civil rights? What are the lessons for us all?
Well, I think
when
one
we get
lesson,
education, we've covered that.
Yeah, I like to think that one lesson is it's never too late to seek justice.
Yeah.
And the truth will always come out in some way or another. And I like to have been a little bit of a part of that. it seems to me that this city started changing when bad things happened. Until that time, until the Freedom Riders, until the bombing, and bad things happened, people were accepting of the status quo. I don't think we should ever accept the status quo. I think that what can come out of this is that everybody's quest for civil rights, and it is a quest for everybody, including the white people in this country. Everybody has a quest for civil rights and for civil liberties and equal justice, is a work in progress. That as long as we see issues, issues like the Trayvon Martin case, not because of the verdict, but because a young black man got killed for no reason. Because when we see issues like that, when we see, and we do see a lot of anti-Hispanic rhetoric, we do see a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric. When we see that, we've got to understand that we are all part of this planet, and that we have all got to, tend to love, respect, and work with each other, because that was Dr. King's message. That was the message that, if we can ever get to be a colorblind society, then we're not going to have those issues. Now, that's not going to happen. But the lessons from 50 years ago...
Do you think we'll never be a colorblind society?
No.
You don't?
No, I think
the young people coming up today, though, honestly, see it differently. I have a very good friend who is a person of color, and he was telling me about his daughter at school, and there was another little black girl in the class, and she said to her dad, "Why does the teacher always get us mixed up? She always calls me her name and then calls my friend her name. Why do you think she does that?" And he said he was tensing up and getting upset. And he said to his daughter, "Why do you think the teacher does that?" She goes, "I don't know, Dad, but we are both the shortest ones in the class."
But Gail...
I mean, and I was so struck by that, Doug, because I said the young people, you have to be taught to hate. You have to be taught to see color.
And they are. I mean, but look, make no mistake. There are parents and grandparents out there today that are still teaching that hate. You only have to go and look at the comments on AL.com for some of these issues. I mean, those are the modern day Klansmanhood, the anonymous posts that you can put there. So it's still.
But don't
being
you think
taught.
That's a very small segment? No.
I don't think.
No?
I think it's a smaller segment for
Not in
sure.
Alabama?
It's a smaller segment than it was for sure, and it's shrinking. But from my look, as long as we got human beings, and human beings have their own choices, there will always be that element of racism. Just like the war on terror, the war on drugs can never be won. It has to be contained. It's always something that we've got to work on. And I think that we as a people have to start spending more time teaching those kids and learning the history and teaching that tolerance that got everybody in this room today where they are.
I just want to say something, though. I agree completely, and I've always said we won't be colorblind just because of the birth defect that was slavery in our
Ever?
history.
You think so too? Ever?
I don't think so. But let me make.
They
a
do
difference.
tell me I always wear rose-colored glasses. I do just think that the younger kids see it differently.
But
I do believe that.
there's colorblind.
Let them get older.
Colorblind would be fine. I just want to make sure that color is not dispositive of what you think of somebody. All right, I don't care if you see color.
Yeah.
But just on the other side of this problem, there's also the kind of soft bigotry of low expectations that's well-meaning. You see somebody who's black and you think, oh, well, they're just a little less capable. So therefore, I'm going to take care of them. And I'm not going to grade that student's paper as hard because that student is black and he or she must have come. I see it at Stanford, right? In this elite university, I see it. So racism comes in many forms. It just doesn't come as I hate you because you're of another color. It can come in I have low expectations of you and therefore I'm not going to be as demanding of you in my classroom. It can come in, I really just think maybe you only got here because of affirmative action, and therefore I'm not going to be as demanding of you. Be very careful of the soft bigotry of low expectations and patronizing minorities, which to me is sometimes more unsettling. If you hate me because I'm black, fine. If you think I'm less than you are because I'm black and therefore you have to take care of me, I'm getting off that
Yeah,
boat.
not so fine.
Right,
Yeah.
not so fine.
I happen to believe Maya Angelou always says that we are more alike than we are different, and I do think that that's true. But I do think there are some differences, and I think the differences are okay. I come from the differences are okay, Judge.
Well, I'm sitting here in something of a maze because I cannot believe that more of us don't recognize how this country, just in the last 7 or 8 years, has focused more on race than education or anything else. Anything else.
And you think that is, why do you think that is, Judge?
And that is because, in part, there are those who will always think that for some reason they are better than others. But then when you put those in high places, like on the Supreme Court, and in the House of Representatives, they then begin to put their feelings into the laws that are passed and the way those laws are interpreted, and they are interpreted to the detriment of those in whom they have no confidence of ability. And that is why the case law, we used to have a hope in the Supreme Court. We don't have that hope anymore. We had some hope that Congress, the House and the Senate, would work together.
Well,
that's not happening,
no.
and it's not happening because some folks think that that the White House is for a white man or woman. And with the election of a person who could not be more educated, editor of the Harvard Law
Review, yeah.
graduate of Columbia College, Harvard Law School. In fact, got royal blood in it. But for many, he's the food stamp president. And that's all he is. And what I say is that until we all recognize that we are much more kin to each other
Yes.
than strangers to each other,
Yep.
and begin acting like it, then this country,
Whose responsibility is it?
it's a responsibility of all of us to let none of us become comfortable as long as these conditions exist, to become comfortable in racism,
So
to become comfortable in unequal education.
So Judge Clement, the ideal world, in the world according to Judge Clement, looks like what? And how do we get there? It looks like what?
In the
On this 50th
world
anniversary.
in the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement, the world is one in which there is equality of opportunity, and no one is held back because of the mere happenstance of the color of his skin, his sexual or her sexual orientation, or the origin, the national origin of his parents.
What is the role, here's a question, what is the role of the business community in advancing civil and human rights? I love that question. The business community.
Speak up. Don't be timid. When you see things that are wrong, you know they're wrong. You know they're wrong.
There was a very good example was here in Birmingham,
Exactly.
just this last year, when the business community got behind a progressive school superintendent,
Right.
and I saw an outpouring of black and white support, commitment to a quality of education that I've never seen before in all my life here in Birmingham. But it was a willingness on the part of the white business community to get actively involved in the improvement of education in this city that I think bodes very well for the future of equal education in Jefferson County.
And Judge, if I could, part of that, though, I think, was also the fact that that was an easy issue. It was a local issue. It was not one that was going to be affected by the legislature in Montgomery, who held a good bit of power, who say, no, you shouldn't do X, Y, Z. And it's up to the business leader sometime when you know it is wrong to stand up to your politicians and your other public servants to say, no, we're not going to let you threaten us with this. We are going to step forward because this is best for our state.
And that's exactly what happened in 63, if you will remember.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different, not different view, but another answer for the business community. Because I do think, first of all, it's the business community. And I really hope that the business community is actually contributing to growing the economy and giving people jobs. Right? That's number one for me from the business community. Because without a robust economy and without economic growth, people do go to their corners. I mean, the fact of the matter is difference is something to celebrate until you think there is a shrinking pie, and then difference becomes those people who are different are taking something I should have. And so one thing that we have had going for us in the United States is we've had over the decades of America a growing pie. And so I do hope the business community stays focused on that. But as you're doing that, I would say make sure that you're reaching out so that opportunity within the business community is for everybody without regard to color. So we know that boards of directors are overwhelmingly in the United States of America white and male. By the way, Regions has a number of both African Americans and women on its board. So, because boards matter. Secondly, when you're doing that succession planning for who's going to come up through the ranks of management and ultimately end up as CEO, try not just to look at the people that you would normally look at. I'll tell you my own story about affirmative action. I was at Stanford on a one-year fellowship. Stanford found among their ranks a black woman Soviet specialist, and they thought, that's kind of interesting. They already had 2 Soviet specialists. I came to Stanford on a special appointment, an affirmative action appointment. Stanford would never have looked at the University of Denver for its faculty. It looked at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and so forth. It worked out okay for Stanford. It worked out okay for me. And so there's nothing wrong with looking outside of your normal channels. And finally, I would say to the business community, and I know that that the business community encourages this, the civic responsibility of each and every citizen is to not just think in broad policy terms, but to reach out and touch some person. And the tutoring that people, that employees are asked to do, and going to the local Boys and Girls Club and helping out there, that's also a part of the responsibility of community, of which the business community is an important part.
The business community, we're sitting here at Regions, which is the only top 500 Fortune company in the state of Alabama, and there's a sign in the elevator that says, good is never good enough. I'm thinking, I like the people at Regions, Gracie. I like how they think here at Regions. Yes, Congresswoman.
I was just going to comment, too. As far as the business community is concerned, keep in mind that the people that work for the businesses have responsibilities. They like a living wage and also benefits so that when they retire, it's not just Social Security. And so that's one way you can offer an opportunity to children, is to make sure that their parents are making enough to take care of them. And that's a very good responsibility for anyone in the corporate structure.
I like this question. In the age of social media, do you feel that it helps or hinders the movements for civil and human rights? Judge, are you on Twitter? You look like a big tweeter.
He's been twittering all panel
Are you on
long.
Twitter and Facebook?
No, ma'am.
So do you think the social media helps or hinders the movement? I think it does.
It
I think
does.
it does. It
Sure.
helps or hinders.
I think it helps.
It helps.
Yes.
I think it helps and hinders. The problem with social media is that some of it is so vicious and so nasty and so anonymous, and in that respect, I don't think that it's
social
a good
media is not a cause.
Are you on Twitter?
Yes. Social media is not a cause. It is an accelerant of underlying trends. And so sometimes it accelerates bad trends, sometimes it accelerates good trends.
So do you weigh in that it helps or hurts or both?
I think both.
Both.
I think both.
Where does immigration and reform fit in the conversation of civil and human rights? Congresswoman, why don't you take that one?
Good. Well, first of all, we start with the knowledge and the fact that we are a nation of nations. And it's made up of immigrants. And when you go out of the country, you will find that this country is a magnet. Everyone is standing in line trying to get visas or some way to come here. But I have the first time, I haven't seen it yet, at any embassy where there are a group of Americans lined up to try to get out of here. And frankly, I've worked with 80-some countries talking about their constitutions, rights for women and rights for others, and peace, and how can we build a culture of peace in the world. And everyone looks at the United States. We're letting the world down because we are not living up to what we can be. And so I think that embrace our diversity and celebrate it instead of setting us one against another, because all of us descended from somebody who didn't come from here. How many Native Americans are present?
Right. Yeah.
And see, but you look like America because you are America. And you're not Native American. Everyone in here can tell you something about where some parent, great-grandparent, or somebody came from. We cannot be anything else but America. And we need to start to embrace it, celebrate it, and make sure that we can be proud of the fact that when we get ready to start anything, whether it's an elementary school or a bank, whether it's a manufacturing company or a research company, we can reach for any culture, and there will be someone that we can involve and include in that process. And it ought to be all colors. Just like I sit here and look out, you are America. And it's time for us to stand up and make sure that we stand tall as Americans, embracing all that come and giving everyone an opportunity. You know, I am black. My great-grandmother was Irish. She came from Ireland. But she married a black man. And consequently, you know, I'm one of those people that proudly say that started off as a Negro and then a colored, and now I'm African American. And so things can change. But I don't think we as a country celebrate enough that we are the nation of the world. Yeah. And we embrace each other, we celebrate each other, and everyone can have a role to play.
I think that's a great way to end. Go ahead.
Go
ahead, Dr. Rice.
It's so important. Look, I come from
nice.
California now. I'm born in Birmingham, but now from California. California has had anti-immigration legislation on the books for a long time, and Proposition 187. And California, of all places, that place that is the most nation-like of any place. And what's really awful about anti-immigration movements is that it not only doesn't celebrate who we are, it forgets why it makes us great. It allows people to come here from every corner of the earth just to be a part of this belief that it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. And those people have come here to make $5, not 50 cents, from the poorest countries in the world. And they've come here like Sergey Brin at 7 years old from Russia, and he founded Google. And so we've been able to mobilize human potential from across the continent. If we ever lose that, then we will not only have sclerotic demographics like Japan and Europe, but we'll lose the very essence of who we are. And so I would just say to my home state of Alabama, don't make the mistake that California made.
Yes. I would just like to say to the people of Alabama, in Southern Hospitality, I was sitting at the table with one, Jay Bailey from Operation Hope, and I was marveling about Southern Hospitality and how much I love coming to the South. And he said, it's one of the few places you can come where people are nice for no economic reason. And I think that's so true. I thank you all for your time today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.